Chapter 13, Survival of the Fittest. At night, at his home in Down, England, Charles Darwin dreamed of executions. By day, his heart raced and stomach ached. Even now, no one is sure whether he had been infected with a tropical disease during his 5-year voyage to South America and Australasia, or if he had been plagued by the fear of hatred that would be directed at him when he revealed his discovery. But one thing is certain, it took him 20 years to tell the world about his important insight. Darwin had found the growth of development, everything in nature, plants, animals, even humans. Could it be explained in purely scientific terms? This conclusion was the final death knell of the world of Augustine, the world in which God was responsible for everything. By carefully measuring, recording, and analyzing the natural world, Darwin showed that God was not necessarily to explain anything at all. The reaction to Darwin's ideas as expressed in On the Origin of Species was as tense as he feared. Darwin was the grandson of the same Josiah Wedgwood, who had done so much to help the abolitionist movement in England. But Darwin himself was not a political radical. Instead, he loved studying nature. From 1831 to 1836, he sailed on the Beagle, filling endless notebooks and with observations of birds, plants, and rocks in South America. Back in London, his research was put into order by specialists, and then he tried to make sense of it. Like Sherlock Holmes, he was willing to entertain any idea as long as it was not impossible. By 1838, he arrived at a single principle that could account for the variety in the natural world. Darwin showed that simply the struggle to survive and reproduce in changing environments could explain evolution of life on Earth. Random differences between living creatures made one more likely to live long enough to have children than another. Some of those children would inherit the key trait that had protected their parent. More of them would survive, until conditions changed with a new trait was favored. A lottery in which the winners win and losers die. And the chances keep changing the odds. That was the secret behind all life. This insight was so clean and so devastating, we are all struggling with Darwin's theory today. Darwin's theory explained how humans became to be. They evolved from other animals, but his ideas pointed to larger issues, which he did not discuss. Why do we exist? What is the purpose of human life? Even the Enlightenment thinkers assumed these questions could be answered only by speaking of God. God was the watchmaker of the universe who set up the rules and remains ever present. Even the Enlightenment thinkers assumed that these questions could be answered only by the speaking of God. God was the watchmaker of the universe who set up the rules and remains ever present. How comforting! Beyond all of the forces of nature and law, there is still someone, a great parent, God. Darwin disagreed as he wrote, "Man in his arrogance thinks of himself as a great work, whom God might have created, but it was more humble and I believe true to consider him created from animals. We may be absolutely alone in the universe. No parent, no God, no purpose, no reason for any of us to be born, grow, live, learn, suffer, die, except to have our own children, protect our young, and so that they can grow, our species lives on." Origin shocked readers, challenged their most basic beliefs, and it seemed to point to an entirely new way of seeing the world. God might exist or it might not. It simply did not matter to science. Darwin's book reached America during the Civil War, and it did as much as any bullet to convince people that the world was a harsh, unforgiving place. Darwin was talking about the natural world, not human societies or race of men. He was interested in science, not theology or politics. It took no time for the others to apply his insights to human affairs. Herbert Spencer, whose books became wildly popular in America and England, announced that the survival of the fittest was one of the inescapable law of nature. It has always been and always would be. Spencer's way of applying applying evolution to society came to be called social Darwinism. Spencer took the view of the English who let the Irish starve and extended it to all of life. Any government assistance to the weak was a terrible mistake. It interfered with the iron laws of nature. The losers, the unfit, the backward should die off, and so that the healthiest, best, most fit could prosper. Nature, he announced, tests everyone. If the poor are significantly complete to live, they do live, and it as well as they should live. If they are not significantly complete to live, they die, and it's best that they should die. Spencer is the cold voice of the world in which power rules. Wars leave the dead piled high, and the God no longer matters. To Spencer and his followers, life is a battle, a struggle for survival. There is no other truth. Winners win, losers lose. The strong survive, but if the future belongs to winners, to the fit, what should be done with the weak? The most compelling and terrifying answer came from Darwin's cousin Francis Galton. Beautiful birth. Francis Galton was both a brilliant, diligent mathematician and was an extremely odd man. He tried reading newspapers underwater. He used an egg timer to figure out how fast his bicycle was going. He stood on the street corners and graded the women passing by so that he could make a map charting the locations of the best and worst-looking women in Great Britain. That map was pure Galton. He rated people, turned them into numbers, then drew conclusions from the patterns of those figures. Take fingerprinting. By studying endless prints, he helped to invent the science of identification. Galton loved the idea that numbers could reveal patterns that were not so obvious to the eye. He was, in fact, so good at collecting and interpreting data that he founded the modern study of statistics. Galton was, in his way, was very much like Blumenbach. A dedicated and rigorous experimenter, he was determined to use science to make sense of the world. He was also ruled by bias and prejudice to which he was completely blind. Galton and his wife did not have any children, but he was obsessed with the question of how traits are passed down from one generation to the other. This led him to challenge one of the oldest and seemingly most obvious ideas of how humans begin growing and develop: the inheritance of acquired characteristics. For a blacksmith father will have a son with strong arms. A mother with a tattoo will find a mark on her baby's arm. Parents who read all the time will have literate children. It took a man as clear about numbers as Galton to show that he was completely wrong. But if the parents did not improve themselves, could be passed on to their children, what could explain the fact that some families have produced so many competent people? Galton decided to collect information from every accomplished person in Europe, map his or her family tree, and if in the clan had characteristics in common. This project was, in its way, as silly as his egg timer speedometer. Galton chose what accomplished meant, which was guaranteed to skew his findings. True, he looked at judges, statesmen, writers, scientists, and even wrestlers and rowers. But since few women held such jobs, he decided he can't judge them. So he largely ignored them. He concluded that Leonardo da Vinci, now thought of perhaps the greatest genius in human history, was not accomplished enough to be considered. Any reader will see today how he was slanted the study was. How unreliable still at the time. Galton's endless examples were impressive. They seemed to prove the excellence ran in the families. Galton drew his natural conclusion from his study. The best families share the best traits. They must breed with one another. And reverse, criminal families with the mental disabilities or few accomplishments are doomed to repeat their sorry histories generation after generation. They must be prevented from having children or weeded out altogether. Scientists demanded that the family planning be removed by the fuzzy area of attraction and romance turned to the task of improving the species. Galton called the program of the scientists eugenics, or beautiful birth. Eugenists believed that just as you would breed champion racehorses by carefully matching bloodlines, you must do the same with people. That was the positive eugenics. But that was only half of their program. Just as you might prune that the diseased limbs off by a plant, later eugenics argued that mentally ill or otherwise socially undesirable people should be sterilized. This was the negative. Gobineau had said that the great Aryan race was doomed, but now Spencer and Gatlin pointed to different conclusions with careful, ruthless management to the pure stock that could be preserved, and that the inferior races contained, control, and extinguished whose were those defective humans. One another came from Germany, a nation of winners. On January 18, 1871, Versailles Palace outside Paris was the site of the ceremony that sickened the French. It was here, in the beautiful hall of mirrors where the French kings had regned, that the Otto von Bismarck chose to stage the coronation of William I of Prussia as the emperor of the newly united Germany. Bismarck, William's cool and brilliant prime minister, had crushed France in the battle and was now binding Germany together under the rule of the Prussian king. This was a land united by the duty to the ruler. Obedience to the law and iron military discipline. Bismarck was certain that the source of his great victories lay in his race. As the heirs of Aryans and Germans were face of the future, the French were Latins, a weak race, and now its period of decline. Bismarck was the ambiguous about Jews. He depended on wealthy Jews to bankroll his ambitious plans, and that the newly united country ended most restrictions against Jew. Finally, able to look forward to working as professionals, prospering in business. Jews eagerly rushed into schools and started new companies, but this only made them the most inviting targets when the economy collapsed. The German stock market crashed in 1873, ruining tens of thousands of Germans. Financial disaster struck just as the Jews were becoming visible as the owner of factories and railroads and politicians and intellectuals. Christians turned on them with fury. Not seen as crusades, Jews were blamed for the entire 19th century economy, in which men labored in factories instead of on the farms, and which fortunes were made in the stocks and bonds. At the very same time, they were attacked for being the socialist or communist radicals who organized workers to protest against factory owners. It was as if the Jews were an immoral poison that were polluting the ancient pure Germany to anti-Semitism, a term invented in 1876. Germans were a people of the land, a people of an ancient tradition. Jews were condemned as rootless city dwellers who were both vile and powerful. Solomon writes the most unforgettable songs. His words are all about hatred, murder, and death. His music is irresistible. As they listen to the song, many teenagers feel as if they are hearing the truth they only know. Solomon's fans hear his hard words and pulsing rhythms as an anthem for their generation. And then one loner who was listening to that music, just that music, over and over again for days, comes to school with a gun and starts shooting his body. And one of his victims appeared night after night on the network news. Everybody knows precisely which song the killer listened to. Are they beautiful? Can they still be heard as music? Or are they so bloodstained that even their beauty is so offensive to the memory of the slain students? Once again, this invented story, but it's just a parallel to that of Richard Wagner, the killers who found inspiration in his powerful operas, murdered millions to this day, is considered extremely offensive to play his music in Israel. You can see how anti-Semitism poisoned even the most brilliant German minds through the story of Richard Wagner. Wagner was not only a musical genius, he was also an idealist, determined to serve his people and his country. At first, he took the streets to fight for a better Germany. When that failed, he devoted 26 years of his life to uniting Germany through art. He set out to write not only music, but lyrics to the 4 interconnected operas of his Ring of Nibelungen cycle. Retelling the story of ancient Norse gods, Wagner's operas were the direct inspiration for J.R.R. Tolkien's own Ring trilogy, and simply despite the transition from one world to another. Wagner's soaring music was no mere entertainment. He wanted his words and music to transform Germany into a beautiful spiritual land that was its destiny. When Bismarck defeated the French, Wagner was thrilled. He despised the French, almost as much as he hated the Jews. In Wagner's mind, Jews were an alien presence in Germany. They were an unpleasant freak of nature let out of the ghettos too soon. Jews were money-grubbing, a pollution of the pure Germany he hoped to create through his music. He wanted to eliminate the Jews' influence in music, as if he wrote operas designed to be the highest expression in the German soul. Wagner himself said that he thought he should become of the Jews. He was an artistic titan that, given to full options, his family took his views further. One of his daughters married the man who shaped the most extreme poisonous ideas about the Aryan race. In 1899, Wagner's son-in-law, Houston Stewart Chamberlain, published a book that featured a new race theory that was particularly harsh about Jews. Looking back over the conflict between Greeks and Jews that began in the ancient world, helped lead the birth of the Christianity, he decided that he was not a clash of the ideas. Instead, it was to form of racial wars. Jews were not individuals with different beliefs who might see the light and be converted. Through centuries of inbreeding, that they had become a separate and distant race. And as this race, it by a terrible biological nature, only could poison the new Germany in which the Aryans were finally fulfilling their destiny, the same pillar of the race theory that confined Africans, Irish, Indians to eternal subhuman status was now applied to Jews. The 21st century genetic test suggests that one part of Chamberlain's theory was correct. While there are millions of Mediterranean Jews who do not fit this category, Jews lived in the northern and eastern Europe did marry within their own communities so often that they have distant genetic profiles. According to one study, the predisposes them to certain diseases as well as a higher degree of intelligence. No modern study, though, would take Chamberlain's next step and the claim that the Jews were born to have harmful, destructive opinions. The logical conclusion of the Chamberlain's theory was that the Jews must be removed for Germany to achieve greatness. Removed how? From how the lynch mobs in America to the Bismarck disdain from the French and the anti-Jews riots Germany, the dark roads of the 19th century led toward brutality. At the same time, the Gobineau and to Spencer and Gatlin and to Chamberlain. Racist ideas went further, arguing now the surgical medical removal of the whole race. Fantasy novels are particularly good at capturing pivotal moments like this. In Tolkien's life, The Return of the King, the hobbit Samwise Gamgee Sam is carrying the Ring of the Power to Frodo, who must destroy it. As he nears Mount Doom, the ring begins to distort even the good-hearted Sam's thinking. Wild fantasies arose from his mind in that he saw Samwise, the strong hero of the age, striding with a flaming sword across the darkened land. As Tolkien fans know, Sam's sane, humble hobbit sense allows him to resist the phantoms called up by the ring. In the real life, the combination of heartless eugenics, grim race theory, and the brutal mobs he offered the promise that Aryanes and the steely-eyed winners could match with flaming swords across the entire world and make it theirs. Yet the other path, the route Lincoln heralded at Gettysburg, had never disappeared. In fact, that it was so easy to find, it led directly to the giant green lady whose lamp glowed beside the golden door of the New York harbor.